Hello there and welcome to Point of View, and this week it's a chance to catch up with Federated Farmers CEO Conor English. One of the main aspects of his job is to lobby for farmers, and there's certainly plenty of issues for him to get his teeth into. And Conor, welcome to Point of View.
Yeah,
Thanks for joining us. South Island Snow, let's start with there. It's been an amazing event in a geographical and a climatic sense, but also the way the volunteers have stepped up.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, the country's had a few big weather events. We've had the drought, and now we're having this massive snow. But look, just as the farmers came to help out the people of Christchurch in the earthquake, when we put our media release out asking for people to help the farmers and the snow rate and get help with the stock up in the hills, we've had plenty of volunteers, and it's been fantastic to see. And it's just, it gives you a bit of a warm feeling, doesn't it, when people put their hand up to help people in adversity.
And I loved the other aspect of it with the volunteers, the wives doing all the baking and the cooking and the bacon and egg pies and getting them up to the guys up there.
Yeah, well, it's just classic country, effort, isn't it? So it's fantastic to see.
Would this have to be one of the worst 5-year periods for weather in farming history?
Well, look, I haven't been around long enough to qualify that, but certainly we have had weather events, and I think we do forget that we actually had very good summer weather for 6 or 7 years, and then we've had a very bad drought, and now we're having snow, and no doubt there'll be some flood somewhere. So the weather's the weather, isn't it? And as farmers, we know that in summer it gets dry and winter it gets wetter, so we've just got to farm to that.
I think one of the Otago helicopter pilots who was doing a lot of the ferrying of people up to help says it's the worst he's seen in about 18 years.
Yeah, that's right. So it's good for the skiers though, school holidays coming up.
Now, the Feds have taken to the media recently about the issue of slow internet speeds around the country.
Yep.
This is obviously a big one, but I imagine you're concerned that the farmers are going to get forgotten.
Yeah, look, the whole broadband thing and internet thing is actually really, really critical to rural New Zealand. We've had people talking about, being 1 million people coming to Auckland. We want people to come into the countryside and to work and contribute in the countryside, and we want those farm businesses to be as good as they possibly can be. They're not going to be able to do that unless we've got, international level internet services in terms of speed and coverage. So with the Rural Broadband Initiative, we worked really hard to get the investment from government up from 48 million to 300 million to get those railway tracks in there. We're now looking at the 700 megahertz or 4G spectrum, trying to get that across 100% coverage in the rural communities. So we absolutely have to get this right, and we're just not concerned that we're just quite there where we need to be.
So what do you need to do? Do you need a clause in the contract to saying that
Well, in terms of the megahertz, the digital dividend, if you like, so for the viewers out there, we're all turning off the analogue TVs and getting into digital TVs.
Yes.
So the spectrum that they use to get to those analogue TVs has now become available and is going to be sold to the telecommunications companies. So the terms of those of that sale matter a lot. So for example, there's a clause in there at the moment that says that whoever buys it has got to provide service to 30% of the people in a particular region. We've suggested to the government that should be as close to 100% as possible, because in an area such as Taranaki, for example, they could easily comply with that 30% by just doing it in New Plymouth and not out to the hinterland, and it's the same right throughout New Zealand. So we'll see if the government changes the rules, and if they do, that'll be good for rural New Zealand.
I mean, the fact is that farming now is very heavily based on computers, isn't it?
Absolutely. Look, they're sophisticated businesses. We've talked about infrastructure, and we did a lot of lobbying around getting roading and road funding, so you can get stuff on to the farms and stuff off the farms. But increasingly it's about getting data on and data off. And you're seeing now with precision farming and the ability to measure more things, the fertility in the soil or the temperature of the soil, what happens, the dry matter, what's happening with animals, and aggregating that data is actually a very exciting development in our ability to improve our productivity. So we absolutely have to get that broadband sorted.
And things like NATE, of course, it's a requirement, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, it is a requirement, and if you're not online, it's a lot harder and a lot more cumbersome and a bigger hassle. Then on the other side of it, you've actually got New Zealand Post now looking at reducing its services because its mail volumes are dropping because of the internet, and in the rural hinterland, if we haven't got that broadband, it's not fair actually that we get a reduced service if we haven't got an alternative one. So all the incentives really towards all the messages that we're giving to the government are make sure we've got as good an internet and broadband service as anywhere on the planet, and we're heading in that right direction, but we just want to make sure we get there fast enough.
And you also want to make sure you can see the English Premier League.
Well, that's right, exactly, and I think that highlights just the change in technology and the change that's taking place in broadcasting and media are phenomenal. And exactly that. I mean, now I don't buy a newspaper. I live in the city. I don't buy a newspaper. I just read it on the internet, on my iPad. But if I was in the country, I can't do that, and so I want my newspaper, and that's fair enough.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, this biosecurity issue is always a thorny one. So many instances of it where it's been going wrong a wee bit, and of course we had this latest one with the PKE finding the limb, the mysterious limb in the PKE. Yeah. Interesting story. Actually, the farmer did pretty well, to be honest, didn't he?
Look, I think the hero in this actually is the farmer, and he or she should be congratulated for putting their hand up, ringing the 0800 number, and saying that they found something that needs to be checked out. And thank goodness it hasn't turned out to be something disastrous. But I think that person should be put up for not quite a knighthood, but should be acknowledged amongst the community as being a responsible person in the rural community. And I'd certainly
he could have easily just picked up the thing and chucked it away, I presume.
Exactly. And if it was from one of those countries that had foot and mouth disease, and we had a foot and mouth disease outbreak, everyone would want to crucify that person. So I think they should be given a big loud applause and congratulated on doing that. So and also though, I think that PMI should also be applauded actually, because they took that issue seriously. They went through a process, and thankfully it was determined that it was a domestic animal, not a foreign animal. But they went through the right process, and I think they too should be congratulated for taking it seriously and getting. We've now got a successful outcome.
How did the heck do they figure out that it was a New Zealand?
Well, they did some DNA testing, and I think their first assessment was that it wasn't a New Zealand based. It was from a foreign country where the PKE had come from, and of course that's an issue that Federated Farmers has been concerned about. Yeah. The volumes of PKE coming into the country have increased enormously. We had a couple of gentlemen from our grain section go over and look at some of these plants, and they found some deficiencies there and some inconsistencies. Brought that to the attention of the Primary Institute, and they went through and they're tightening things up, which is good. So it's a bit of a win-win all round, but we've got to be very vigilant on biosecurity because it's our biggest risk as an industry, and if we lose control of that, it's not good for New Zealand.
And we are becoming more reliant on this PKE stuff coming from countries that do have a history of foot and mouth. That is a big issue, isn't it?
And that's why it's appropriate that we are very vigilant on what the requirements are to make sure that we de-risk that importation. And look, with these weather events, it's highlighted the importance of supplementary feed. And I think people might have forgotten, but the reason why PKE came in the first instance a few years ago was because of the drought that was in Waikato, and Waikato hadn't experienced many droughts. And if we hadn't had PKE, then we would have had a lot of animal welfare problems. We would have had a lot of production problems. So it's a useful part of the diet for our dairy farmers. But we've absolutely got to ensure that it's, we've de-risked it in terms of biosecurity.
Now, I know Nathan Guy is saying that he's looking to tighten the import rules. Is that the best we can do? I mean, is that all we can do?
Yeah, look, we've been through quite a process, and they're implementing some new measures, and that's good to see. So the government's taking it seriously, and our farming community needs to take it seriously and make sure that if they do spot something, that they do raise it and raise that flag, and let's hopefully we don't have those sort of things happening anymore.
So we'll be looking for an honours for the farmer involved, eh? Good on.
Well, you have to pat him on the back, absolutely.
Conor English, our special guest on Point of View. We'll take a wee break now, and we'll be back with more from Conor right after this. Welcome back. This is Point of View, and our special guest this week, CEO of Federated Farmers, Conor English. Well, Conor, the One Plan signed off this week, but does that mean it's the end of the road for the farmers in the region, or a long way to go?
Well, no, it doesn't. We're just trying to get our heads around just exactly what has been signed off. But for us as an organisation, of course, we're in the High Court, and that's coming up in the next wee while. Just looking on points of law, the process around delivering that one plan, because we've had some very significant concerns about it, its impact not only on the farmers but on that wider community there in that Horizons area. When you look at the regional council next door in Taranaki and on the other side in Hawke's Bay, we seem to have been able to have worked through pretty constructively with both those regional councils, but Horizons has certainly been problematic.
How is the case progressing? I mean, it comes before the courts.
Yeah, it does. It should be coming out in the next week or so, and we'll just see where that gets to. The reason we went to the High Court is that we were very concerned at the outcome of the Environment Court judge's decision, and it sort of, in our view, took us backwards, and there were certainly some areas and points of law that we want the High Court to have a look at.
It obviously causes a great deal of stress. The prospects are not good for the farming.
Well, look, I think overall over the country prospects are pretty good for farming, but what farmers don't need is headwinds. What they need is tailwinds, and that's what the country and the economy needs. We need jobs here in New Zealand. It's a tough time. We've had the global financial crisis, we've had droughts, we've had a range of things to cope with. And what you don't want to do is make life harder than it needs to be. So when you have plans that come out that have a direct impact on farms, and there's been various reports about the economic impact of that, but at its extreme, you're looking at farm profitability being affected by up to 43%. That's significant. No one on a salary wants to turn up to work and find out that their income's been dropped 43%. Maybe they might not turn up to work, the next day. So we just think we need to get the balance right, and the balance isn't quite right there. So we'll look at the devil in the detail of what's been announced this week on that, and just see where we move through from there.
Okay, great. Well, now the meat industry excellence. You are supporting, obviously, the involvement of that?
Yeah, look, I stood up at the first meat industry excellence meeting held down in Southland, a month or so ago, and said three simple things, and that is the status quo leads to peasantry. There must be change. There must be change now, and no one is exempt from change. The challenge is, what change should there be, and what change is possible. And so absolutely, we've been supportive of the group that's going around and having meetings across the country. We've helped them out in numerous ways, because it's really important that the farmers get involved in this discussion. It's their industry, it's their families that are at risk and their profitability, and they're also shareholders, major shareholders in the meat processing industry. So having a good discussion and debate about it is actually, in our view, really helpful. The trick though is, what's the plan moving forward? And I think that's the more difficult challenge, and it's one of the things that we'll be discussing at our AGM next week. Do
you think farmers are really taking this seriously?
Look, I think they are, because they're looking at their bank accounts and they're seeing that they need to be better. I think it's the first time, and I've been asked often, is it possible that there will be change? I think it is possible there will be change. And the reason is that when you look across at all the players, they are almost all open to change, whereas that hasn't always been the case. There's always been people who haven't been keen on change at all.
Their own agendas, resistance.
Yeah, but I think what the recognition is right through that supply chain is that if the farmer doesn't get more profitable, then there will be less sheep, there will be less lambs, less cattle to go through the supply chain, and everyone will be worse off. The drop in numbers has been very telling.
I mean, is it realistic to see change coming pretty soon, do you think?
Look, I think it is realistic to think that something will change.
Yeah.
Time will tell just what that is going to be. Because if there isn't proactive change, there is going to be reactive change, and that will see freezing works close. If the numbers are down again, there just isn't the requirement for people to work, because that's the other people that are affected a lot in this are the people through that supply chain, the people working in the freezing works, the people driving the trucks. It's not just about the farmers. The farmers are just one small portion of this. What people forget is that for every dollar of exports that we have, the farmer only gets sort of 10 to 15 cents of it. The rest of it actually goes to other people in the supply chain.
Obviously the ageing population of farmers in New Zealand, and they've done it their way all these years. I imagine there is a certain feeling of, it's a bit, change is tricky, you know.
Well, look, I think farmers have continually changed. They evolve and they adapt to things, and they do new things if they understand why and if they understand what it is they need to do, and it makes economic sense for them to do it. So that's where I think to make progress, there needs to be a pretty clear plan, and it needs to be well articulated, and farmers absolutely they'll adapt. They've proven that. They are fantastic at improving their productivity. We're now producing about the same amount of meat with half the number of animals, so our farmers can pat themselves on the back, and look, they'll navigate through this, but we do need to know where it's heading.
Now, what about the meat companies themselves, the four big ones that are getting together? Shutting that boardroom door and nutting this out, presumably.
Yeah, look, there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes here, Mark, and we're a wee bit involved in that as well. There is going to be something pop out of the woodwork sooner or later, and we'll see where it goes to from there.
Okay. The companies themselves, they say there's no guarantee they'll be able to find a workable solution, but
well,
thoughts on
yeah. Well, look, that's the complexity in it, isn't it? I mean, there's been a range of suggestions, but I think some sort of consolidation is likely. Where I think that the impacts on farmers the most is just around the procurement side of things. People have talked about the Fonterra model. Well, what the Fonterra model is effectively a large pool. So whether you sell your produce on the 1st of December or the 1st of May, you get the same amount per kilo. Now that's a dramatic change in the meat industry. Those sorts of options have got to be sort of worked through. There's talk about how you constrain new capacity coming in and yes, taking away the advantages of any sort of redundant capacity that's been shut down. So there's a number of sort of complicated factors here that do have to be worked through. But I think there is a willingness there to make some progress. And look, it's not all going to happen overnight. If you look at the reform of the dairy industry, in the late 90s, that took 3 years. The TAF took 3 years. This is going to take longer than 6 months.
Actually, it was interesting yesterday. We had Jan Carey from the Infant Nutrition Council on, and she said that all competing companies come together and they get on remarkably well inside the boardroom. As soon as they're outside, they're at loggerheads again. But they're in there time enough to make decisions.
Yeah. Well, I think there's that word co-opetition, isn't it?
Yes.
And I think that's what farmers want to see in the marketplace, because the stuff that the farmers can do on their farms, the stuff that the processors can do in their processing, but also the stuff that can be done in the marketplace. And that's the frustration I think farmers have felt, in the anecdotal stories of undercutting and that sare thing. So we need a bit more collaboration there.
As this goes to where the Federated Farmers Conference is on, what are you hoping for?
Well, look, I think we've got to start getting a consensus around, what is the way forward. And I think what's happening now is that people are waiting to see what the companies are going to pop out with. That's what they've said, that they're going to come up with a plan. We know that they're working on that. That's going to pop up shortly. And that'll be the straw man, if you like, that we can all have a positive or a negative view about, or how you might fine tune it. So, that'll be the train that's on the track.
Well, good luck with that, and hope it all goes well for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
Well, Conor English there, Chief Executive of Federated Farmers, and that's just about this edition of Point of View. We thought we might leave you with some great images of the snow and how it affected the high country of the South Island. We thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.
It was the biggest snow dump the South has seen in over 2 decades, and it fell for 4 days straight.
The farmers in the hill country haven't had it easy over the years, and every time they put their head up and saying, things are looking better, hello, something else happens.
Snow's forecast for low levels of...
Farmers were well warned of the low that swept up the country last week, so they had time to put stock in winter-safe locations. But even then, they weren't safe.
We actually had 100 cows grazing up at Snowdon, about another 15 k's further up the inland road, and we brought them home in the weekend. They were in 80 centimetres of snow, and so as soon as the road was open, we just brought them down. But there's a lot of snow up the inland road. There'll be as much snow up there as further up as there was in 92. There's not as much here.
Ben Chafee was one of the lucky ones. On Wednesday, many in high country farms still hadn't been able to get to their animals to give them feed.
There's a lot of cattle in, up to their necks in snow, but they appear to be moving towards where the farmers were hoping that they'd move to. But we're all very aware that it's the start of winter, really, and we just hope there's not another bomb on its way.
For many, it brought back bad memories.
Anyone that's still farming, that was farming in 92, remembers 92.
But unlike the snowfall in 1992, which resulted in high numbers of stock deaths, this snowstorm occurred before lambing, which will help to mitigate losses. However, while there won't be as many stock deaths as 92, they're still inevitable. And it's just not the cold and lack of feed that's taking its toll on stock, but a lack of water as well, with many watering holes and creeks frozen over. And although farmers will be hoping the snow disappears soon, further falls have been forecast in some parts for later this week, and many roads remain closed, including this inland road here in northern Canterbury. Volunteers have responded en masse to calls from Federated farmers and the Rural Support Trust to help snow raking. Teams have been digging, bulldozing and flying up in helicopters to snow rake. Those who couldn't volunteer snow raking helped out in other ways.
We're not really snow rakers, but we're looking after the people factor, and there's people up here with young families. It's pretty good that they can get a bit of fresh fruit and stuff like that. And that's what we'll be doing today.
With an average of 2 to 3 snow events per winter in the area, carrying on up until November, this may not be the first and last one this year, but many are expecting it will be the worst. John Watson in Canterbury.